Now, please welcome Dean Pedro Noguera.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Australia. And thank you, Alan and Center Edge for pulling this a bit together and bringing us Jeff Cole, who we'll hear from in a moment, who's doing critical research right now, examining how various sectors of society are being impacted by the pandemic. We all know it's been a major disruption to all aspects of life all over the world, particularly more so in education than in many other fields. Today, Jeff is going to talk a little bit about that impact and how he's going to be studying it. This is our opportunity to pose some questions to him about the nature of the research he'll be doing. So I'm looking forward to hearing this. Jeff, some of you may know, was formerly at the Annenberg School as the director of a center there for the digital future. Prior to that, like me, he was a faculty member at UCLA. Long career in communications and media. It's really an honor to have him join us today. I'm not sure if I'm turning it over to you, Alan, or directly to Jeff, but either way, hit the baton.
I think we're going to turn it over to Jeff. Jeff?
Okay, thank you, Dean. Thank you, Alan. It is really nice to be here, and I very much hope this is the beginning of a new relationship. And so let me tell you what I'm up to. I've been spending the last 21 years tracking digital around the world, work we do in 36 countries. And as we were sitting in the middle of the pandemic, I thought, with absolutely no exaggeration, this is the greatest disruption of our lifetime. Nothing else has even come close. Some people talk about World War II, and during World War II, we had loved ones in harm's way, we experienced shortages, but we went to the movies. We went to school, we went to work, we ate in restaurants. We've never experienced anything like this. And whether we realize it or not, we've been living through the biggest social science experiment of all time, except none of us volunteered for it. So realizing that this truly was, to use an overused term, this truly was a once in a lifetime experience, we wanted to understand how people were coping, how they were dealing with it. And in the work I've done in the internet, the pandemic really is the victory lap of the internet. Most of us had 3 days to get our school, our work, our buying, our entertainment online. What couldn't be done online couldn't be done or had to be canceled or delayed. We realized, many of us before, but all of us realized during the pandemic, that broadband is not a luxury, it's a lifeline as important as water or power. And I say that knowing what Texas has just gone through. Finland was right in 2010 when their president declared broadband a basic human right. So we wanted to understand what was happening. So we went into the field in April and then again in June. April, this was a novelty. For kids, this was like a snow day. They were able to watch more television. Families were together. It was sort of fun for some of us. By June, we knew this wasn't going to end in another month or so, and this was going to have profound consequences on our economy and maybe even on our mental and physical health, and we were much more down. And out of that work, which I'm going to present very briefly, we've launched a massive project, which we really welcome some collegiality and collaboration here. But let me share with you a little bit of what we found. Of course, I'll make this presentation available, and anybody who'd like to dig deeper and look at some of the data behind it, happy to do that as well. But okay, so let me start. And as we did this work, I'm just going to try to get this full screen if I can. Okay. As we did this work, first thing we wanted to answer I seem to be frozen on my, yeah, okay. So just a slight delay. As we did this work, first thing we wanted to know was what were people missing? Being isolated, being left alone or with outside of the world. There were about 15 activities. And if you look at this, you can see the gray numbers represent April. The green numbers represent June. And here on the side, these are the changes from April to June. But if you looked at the things we missed the fundamental American value of being able to go where I want to go, do what I want. That was number one. Visiting with friends and relatives, close personal contact, dining in restaurants, half of us missed. Things we missed less, going to the movies, working out, in April, going to work. And if you look over the course of the months, there's nothing we missed more 2 months later. And there were a number of things we missed less. We didn't miss as much going where I want to go. We got accustomed to it. We didn't miss dining in restaurants. We were eating at home. We didn't miss going to work. And if we look at the next slide, we wanted to see what are the things people enjoy being home, being isolated, being with their families. And no commute was at the top, just more time for ourselves, more time for hobbies, more time for sleep and to watch television and movies. For the first time, we had enough time to watch all those streaming series. People have told us for years we have to watch, we make lists, we feel guilty because we can't get around to it. We know it's good. During the pandemic, we didn't mind if The Irishman was 4.5 hours. And if you look at the things we enjoyed, there was nothing we enjoyed less from April to June. And there were things that we enjoyed more, like less pressure to visit relatives. We wanted to understand personal behaviors. We know that next to age, the single biggest risk factor for COVID and consequences is obesity. So in theory, all of us should have been taking better care of ourselves, losing weight, being more resistant, but being humans, that's not what happened. You can see the June numbers in red, the April numbers in parentheses. 41% of us were eating more, only 10% were eating less. Third of us drinking more, exercising less, and marijuana use up 40%. And we looked at relationships, what's happening with cabin fever and families being isolated. The good news is by a 7-to-1 margin, and it grew. Parents said their relationships with their children improved, and by a 3-to-1 margin, spouses or partners said their relationships improved. There will be a divorce spike when this is all over because a bad relationship wasn't going to do well, although a few seem to have repaired. And as soon as people have choices, there will be some divorce. And mental health, this is absolutely devastating. I've been working for a couple of years on the issues of epidemic levels of loneliness among Gen Z. And I'm interested in that because I think the defining characteristic of Gen Z is that they've had digital media all their lives. And I'm not claiming there's causation there. But in theory, digital media, and particularly social media, should make it easier to find other people, build connections and community. And yet the reverse seems to be true. But if you look at the numbers, a third of us were feeling lonely. That only shrank a little bit. Started with 2/3 down to half of us feeling anxious and a third feeling depressed. And if you ask people what they're anxious about, it's not their safety or their homes, or it wasn't even their job or their financial security, or it was for some. It was the current political situation, their health, and really depressing the general future of the world. Of course, social injustice and George Floyd occurred during the pandemic, but a lot of issues there. And if you just look for a second at the issue of trust, who we trusted for information on the pandemic, in every country we worked with, about 20 on this, with the exception of the US and the UK, their leader, their president, their prime minister was the #1 source. You can see in America, our president was at the very bottom and even dropped 8 points from April to June, but that was when the bleach and all those things occurred. And Anthony Fauci, the undisputed authority. And interestingly, when we asked our friends in Australia, the UK, Chile, who was their Fauci, their answer was Fauci, which shows that he's become really a global authority. And then this, of course, will get at the heart of what we might be able to do together. We found, by and large, online learning was a failure. Not a shock. Most teachers had a couple of days to get their classes online. Many had never heard of Zoom. Few had used it. The classes were not designed to be online. They did get better, but it's not a surprise that it didn't work very well. If you compare the numbers, you can see a bit of improvement over the 2 months, but still the best number is only, as half of us still said we prefer the physical classroom. Over half say they had to work harder online than in person. Half say they learned less. They did their teachers, about half, were doing a good job, but 55% felt isolated from learning, and only 43% said they actually like remote learning. Now we're digging into this much, much deeper, and I'll come to that at the end. And as far as college students, we talked to K through 12 or 7 through 12 and college. We found last spring college students that 90% planned to come back for the year, even if there was a pandemic. Only 10% were going to take time off. Of course, the tragedy was you couldn't take time off. You couldn't travel. You couldn't have work experiences, but over half of them expected a cut in tuition. Just moving a little further, I'm sorry for the speed at this. I just want to get a few things across and then we'll talk. Work at home. Before we could even evaluate working at home or working online, we had to answer the question, how many people can work remotely? And the answer is 74% of us say that we can do at least a little bit of our job remotely. 26% say we can do all of it remotely. And the same percentage, not the same people, 26% say they can't do any of their job remotely. And of those with a high school education, 51% say they can't do any of their job remotely. So there's some real class issues here. And if you ask people who are working remotely, what do they miss? 2/3 miss just being somewhere else during the day, change of scenery, something else happening. 60% of us miss socializing, interacting with our colleagues or customers. 56% miss structure. We found this missing structure through all of our data. People like to know where they're going to be, when, at what time, when things start, when they end, when lunch is. Many of us missed that structure. And 40% of us, it's hard to believe this in Los Angeles, but 40% of us missed the enjoyable parts of your commute. If your commute is 20 minutes, not through bumper to bumper traffic and road rage, it can actually be a useful decompression. And what do people working from home enjoy? Number one, no commute. That's what we're more familiar with. 2/3 more flexibility. I work when I want. I take a couple hours off, come back. I can catch up on weekends. 61% relaxed dress. I won't ask how many of you were wearing shoes, let alone pants, but I'll tell you I'm not wearing shoes. Control of environment, 59% enjoyed that they don't have the crazy person next to them turning on the air conditioning in winter and the heat in summer. Of course, this would make no sense at USC, but a third enjoyed not having irritating workmates and fewer disruptions. And if you look at the problems of working from home, the distractions of home, kids, pets, phone calls, and something I think we're going to see a lot of in the coming years, a new problem. A third of us were concerned with the erosion of the boundary between work and home. Work and home just spill into each other. It's hard to separate. And of course, too many phone calls and Zooms and lack of privacy. So if you ask people who worked in an office before COVID, if their office opens, what do they want to do? Only 10% say they want to go back just like before, every day. 30% say they never want to go back. I don't really believe that. I think we'll miss that. And 60% say I want to go back, but on a different schedule. I think the model we're going to see is the office is open. Everybody comes in Thursday morning for a couple of hours, has meetings, sees each other. They then come in another 2 days of their own choosing, and the other half or so is working from home. I think that will be the model. Couple of other quick topics, and then we'll open it up. Media use, this of course gets at the heart of what I do. I've been briefing studios on this in depth. Be happy if anyone's interested. But we found streaming use up 52% among those under the age of 30, 74. But traditional television up almost as much. Social media up, but not leading. And even reading was up. Where people got their information about COVID, the number one choice was cable television in April. In June, it was still cable, but tied with local. For the first time, local news increased because we wanted to know what was happening with COVID in our community. Social media relied on, but not at the top, and the daily printed newspaper at the bottom. I teased my staff that we could have put out a press release that from April to June, reliance on the daily printed newspaper doubled, which was true. It went from 1% to 2%. As far as where within cable we get our information, stayed the same from April to June, with CNN number 1, Fox number 2, MSNBC number 3. But you can see from April to June, CNN lost 9 points, Fox stayed the same, and the 9 points from CNN went right to MSNBC. Very good time for them. And lastly, on media, just who do we trust within cable news? We did this, we shared this with CNN, and their reaction was, if it weren't for that darn Rachel Maddow on MSNBC, we would have had the top 3, and they did. And Fox was at the bottom with the bottom 3. 2 last things. We found that people did not want to use cash. They were concerned that cash might contain the virus, which has turned out not to be true. But I've been really interested in cashlessness. And Americans fiercely oppose cashlessness. We don't even want to get rid of the penny. But during the pandemic, we've had to live cashless. People don't want our cash. They don't even want to touch our credit cards. We call ahead, we pick things up. Support for cashlessness has increased greatly. And 2 last slides, I'll leave these because there's so much information here. What are you comfortable doing outside your home right now? The only thing we're really comfortable with is grocery shopping in person, because this is what we've been doing from the beginning. But only 11% of us are comfortable going to a movie, although New York is about to open their theaters. Only 11% a theme park. Only 5% of us are comfortable taking a cruise on a cruise ship, or as I call them, mobile hospitals. And very powerfully, what will you not do until a vaccine is found? And what this really means, until most of us are vaccinated, because the vaccine has been found. You can see the number one choice is none of the above. 26. So if you add that 26 to these, you can see 76% of us will not take a cruise. And even 68% of us will not go to a movie until there's something resembling herd mentality. So there's some really devastating data there. So enough of data. Let me just talk for about 3-4 minutes about what we're doing and then open it up. So I think we're really in an extraordinary situation right now. I think this is the first time since the Allies took Paris in 1944, and we knew we were going to win the war, but it took another year. It's the first time since then that we knew that everything in our lives could change, that we were going to rethink everything. And I think right now we're going to rethink how and where we work, what we buy and how we pay for it. Will we travel? I think learning will be rethought to a small degree. We're going to reconsider everything could change. And I think some things will revert back immediately. Online learning. I think kids will be back in front of their teachers as soon as possible. Some schools started today in the LA area. I think some things are going to take 3 or 4 years. Travel, recreational vehicle sales are through the roof. My friends say, wait a year, you'll get the best deal imaginable on an RV. We like RVs because we don't have to stay in hotels. They're moving hotels and people are going to parks. It may be 3 or 4 years before we get on crowded airplanes and go to crowded cities. We'll see. And I think some of the changes are permanent. Buying online. We found for the people who had never bought a thing online, March 1st, 2020, literally a year ago, within 4 weeks, 37% of them were regularly buying online. I don't think those gains will be given back. I think changes in work are permanent. So we think it's going to take 5 years to figure this out. So we have just launched a massive project. We've taken 7 sectors of life, health and well-being, mental and physical health, and relations with doctors, health and well-being, work, which is both the nature of jobs and where we work, learning, everything about hybrid models and online learning, how we shop and how we pay for it, homes, buildings, and communities, which is what do we want in a home? How are we going to reconfigure our homes? Where do we want them to be? In cities, in suburbs, public transportation, culture, travel, and entertainment and sports. We've put together about 40 experts to advise us, a list we hope will grow after this call. And that includes global CEOs, university presidents, deans, journalists, government officials. And we are in the field right now. We are going to cut this data every quarter, but we'll be in the field for 5 continuous years. Every quarter, we'll produce 7 survey results. There'll be 28 surveys a year. We are doing this in cooperation and with the support of the Annenberg School and the Marshall School, and I hope with this call, you as well. And we are also going to do forecasting, business forecasting every quarter on what we think is going to happen in that sector the next quarter. And we don't want to stereotype you as only interested in education. We welcome your input on education, but we welcome your input on any of the other sectors as well. And as we learned, what was happening in education greatly affected whether parents could leave home and go to work, and everything is tied together, which is why we're looking at everything. And with that, I think, Alan, I think you're going to sort of moderate. I'm happy to take questions on what we found and what we think is going to happen, and also happy to take questions on the work we're doing and what kinds of things we might do together.
Thank you, Jeff. And let's open it up for everybody now. But as we do, folks, share your questions in the chat space. And again, Jeff, as I get older, I think context is king. And you've been doing this for more than 2 decades in terms of your World Internet Project. Tell us your biggest surprises about from the last 2 decades, where we were in 2020 and where we are going forward.
Well, on the internet, when we started, everybody connected to the internet with a PC on the desk and a hard wire to the wall. And back in 99, 2000, we knew that how we work was going to change, how we buy was going to change. That was pretty obvious. But we never expected that PC on the desk and hard wire was going to transform to where PCs aren't even selling very well. Desktop PCs aren't selling very well. And virtually the world is connected by a little computer in our pocket that we would have 24/7, and literally 24/7, because we found that 90% of teenagers sleep within arm's length of their phone. So we never anticipated mobile phones, and we never anticipated that social media could reach 2.5 billion people and could really transform politics and so many other things. So those were the biggest surprises.
Yeah. Dean, I don't know if you want to ask a question, but I've got a couple more, and then I've got some questions from the audience.
Thank you, Jeff. That was really interesting presentation. So one of the contradictions we've seen during this pandemic is those who have been most impacted by the virus, that is most likely to catch it, are also most reluctant to take the vaccine and most reluctant to send their kids back to school. Now, I'm wondering, my question to you is, fear of the virus seems to actually be, I'm wondering if what's the profile? Is there a profile of people who are afraid? Because I'm seeing people who are living in areas where they are, where they're very low infection rates, still extremely afraid, and even after they get their vaccine. And it seems like fear is compounding itself. And I wonder if there's a profile of the individuals who are most likely to be afraid, and how this will impact quality of life going forward.
Yes, very much so. We asked in April and June, what will you do when a vaccine is made available? And 28%, I'm sorry, said, I want it day one. I'm first in line, count me in. 52% said, I want it, but let's see what happens. Let's watch to make sure people don't drop dead a few days later. So 80% expressed some interest. Off the bat, in the middle of the worst pandemic of our lifetime, 20% said, nope, not interested. And that we know there's been an anti-vaxxer movement. That anti-vaxxer movement is not all far right-wing know-nothings led by people like Robert Kennedy Jr., to the dismay of the Kennedy family. So we looked at who were those 20%. And, we would think we might stereotype being at universities that they're poorly educated people with bad access to information. Not true at all. largely affluent. We know there are some special circumstances. We know in the African American community, the memory of Tuskegee runs very, very deep. But now I also worry there's a really interesting situation that emerged yesterday with the deployment of the J&J vaccine. And the J&J vaccine has these incredible advantages, everybody knows this, of being single dose, of not having to be refrigerated, at least the way that Pfizer has had to be, which means it's going to be easier to use in the less developed world. It's going to be easier to get hard to reach populations. You only have to get once, but at the same time, people perceive it to be a less effective vaccine. I think if you look at the evidence, that's not really true where it counts. But then the problem is we're now facing a political situation that underserved populations are going to feel we're getting the leftover, we're getting the third choice, and that's going to create tension. But the answer to your question is it's a pretty good cross-section who don't want the vaccine. And there's also a great selfishness in that, because the attitude, before COVID was, I don't want a vaccine, but let everybody else get it, so then I won't need it. And the only way we're going to ever get rid of this thing is that if we all get vaccinated. We get rid of it forever. We can have 20% not take it and manage it. The only way we can eradicate it is for everybody to be vaccinated. Maybe that's an opinion. I should be careful.
Jeff, I'm wondering, Dean, did you want to follow up, or are you good?
No, I'm good. I just, I was thinking that, we have data showing fear of crime is highest among people who are safest, ironically. And I'm just wondering if there, you're not a psychologist, but is there I meet people, and it's interesting just to see how fear of the virus is manifest and what kind of choices it leads to. I also wonder about how prolonged isolation will affect people going to the future, because people start to get used to just living alone, being alone, and after a while they get more and more afraid to even go outside. And I just worry that this could have very long-term consequences.
One of the most disturbing numbers to come out of our April and June work, which we're going to follow very carefully, is 37% of the people we talked to said even after a vaccine, I want to keep my distance from strangers. I think we now view strangers as a threat, the same way sometimes we did because of crime. But now, and clearly, even if we eradicate COVID, there's going to be flus. There may even be, hopefully not, epidemics, not pandemics. So I worry about the lingering effects. And I also worry, my father grew up in the Depression. And 50 years later, when he was a successful businessman, he still carried the baggage of the Depression. To my father, you couldn't waste money. He saved inordinately. As much as he loved me, he could never understand how I could give up a good job because it wasn't fulfilling. Growing up in an era where there were no jobs, jobs weren't meant to be fulfilling. Jobs were how you took care of your family. So I wonder how much of that we may care, how much there may be deep impact and effects, and fear of strangers or fear of other people may be one of them.
Jeff, Dean, follow up, or can I ask questions? So Jeff, again, thinking about, there's so many pieces to this thing, and I'm thinking of, and I want to get in, we have some questions I'm seeing from Melanie and Maria and others about K-12 education and looking into the sort of the crystal ball. But, I'm looking at like the New York Times covered the business section a week or so ago, the boredom economy. And I'm wondering how much of that can be shifted into the education economy. I'm thinking about so much of what you've just talked about Again, one of the reasons that the dean wanted to do this discussion is we're not just educators, we're regular human beings that are experiencing this thing like everybody else. And I'm wondering, on the boredom economy meets the education economy, we think about, you talked about loneliness. We know that SEL is so crucial for great teaching and learning outcomes, social emotional learning. We think about broadband. You brought up Finland, and we know that we have a massive digital divide. We've done some webinars over the summer and in the fall about content. So walk us through that crossover dribble, if you would, between societal issues to you're talking to some of the best and brightest in terms of faculty and staff at Rossier about how it informs education going forward on these key areas like social emotional learning.
Okay, great, happy to. I'll try. Well, first, just on broadband, we have about 7% of the country that doesn't have broadband. And that has to be addressed. There's just, as I said, broadband's become a lifeline. The debate on that is over. It's just a question of how fast, in what ways. You've seen the Biden administration's already moving with a $50 a month subsidy for people who really need it. But that we tend to think of that 7% as those are the people we don't see regularly, with some exceptions. But many of us experienced a broadband divide because we didn't realize. I've become a little fuzzy for a second. I just seem to have a camera up. I'm just going to close that off, and then give me just 1 second. This has happened before. It just has to reset. Yeah, sorry about that. I better get that fixed. But we found many of us didn't realize we don't have enough broadband. We had enough broadband the way we were living until 5 people were at home, and all of a sudden 2 of them were going to work, 2 of them were going to school, and the 5th was watching Netflix. This may be the first time in our lives that our kids said, "Get off the internet, I gotta go to class." But to your larger issue, what I think Zoom and this pandemic does has moved a lot of the outside world that took a lot of effort into our homes. And in our health and wellness, we've been asking about what do people want to do when this is all over? And there are certain things they want to change their appearance. Some talk about plastic surgery. Some want to learn how to meditate. But learning more, taking both classes directly related to their work and taking classes and educating themselves on other issues, an extraordinary important goal that people identify now. So I think you're going to see an awful lot of what we learned in work and learning and being at home sort of mixed together and move forward together, if that makes sense.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. I'm thinking about both Melanie and Maria asked questions about the changes coming in K-12 education. So share with us, looking into the Jeff crystal ball. By the way, I like it when you put your hand over the screen. A lot of people do that to me, and I don't have any problems with my screen. They just want to shut me out. It's just the opposite with you.
I have an autofocus issue.
But it's taking the 2 questions of how should K-12 education change and how will K-12 education change? Give us your crystal ball on that.
Okay, well, first of all, in the work we did in April and June, we didn't feel that we could talk to 2nd or 3rd graders directly. So we talked to 7 through 12 and college students. And in the work we've just launched, and we're almost finished with the first quarter, all 7 sectors look at the general population with the only exception of learning. With learning, we broke it into 3s. A third of who we're going to talk to are 7 through 12 students. A third are college students. And the third are parents of K through 12. We're going to try a little later to talk to teachers and administrators. So most of what we know is 7 through 12. I think it's a whole different set of issues with second, third, fourth graders, basic skills. So I'm not as knowledgeable there. But as I mentioned, the first biggest tragedy of online learning, I used to, as you know, Alan, I used to be a professor at UCLA. I used to teach these 500-person classes, which I actually enjoyed. And I used to tell my students, most of whom were freshmen on day one, that only 20% of what they learn is in the classroom. So, what we found is that Zoom was reasonably efficient at transmitting information, but is absolutely worthless at building socialization, teaching the rules of growing up, living, dealing with other people. So I think the consequences have been devastating. We also, taking it a little further, there are two other issues that we want to look at pretty closely. One of them is our friends. We work with an organization called BAR, who does work with the Department of Education on primary schools and secondary schools. And we're learning from them, I don't think this is a secret, that more teachers are leaving the profession than at any time in history. And not only does that represent a problem for education, but the majority of those K through 12 teachers are women. And in other industries like travel that have been completely disrupted, they are more heavily women than men. And many of these women have had to give up careers to be at home with their children because their children were not in school. And there's fears that women may lose 20-25% of their advances in the marketplace because of what's happened with COVID. We're very interested in what's happening there. So there are so many things, we've begun to learn, but the bottom line was teachers are not going to be replaced. I think we've learned some benefits of hybrid. I think we may see more hybrid during summers and the ability to do supplemental things, but we have learned a fundamental lesson. The way kids learn are physical. I sound like I'm a teachers union representative, but the way kids learn are in a classroom, face-to-face with teachers and other students.
Yeah. Again, I've got a series of questions from.
Let me try to answer much shorter.
This is all good. I've got a series of questions, and in the control room, Australia, if you could unmute, we're going to try and unmute a few folks. Like Zoe, I think had a question, and let me ask a question, then hopefully, and if not, I'll read it from Zoe. But Jeff, the big shift since March to March, if you were looking at one common denominator in education and the world, has been the engagement of parents. It's never going to be the same, right? And so where there was the student component and the educator component, and they had to be engaged. The parent piece, not so much, as we all know. So that has forever changed. Talk to us about, again, as you've been looking at these shifts and how people use their time, their priorities. Talk to us about the parental piece as you see it.
Well, we measured that. We have some good data on that, and we've looked at that in some detail. That's one of the reasons why we're devoting a third of the learning sector to parents. And we try to distinguish between the parents who just used online learning as a way to, put their kids in a room and left them alone, to the parents who were sitting next to them. But we found, you're absolutely right, the level of engagement was extraordinary when parents saw the learning happening in front of them. They became much more involved. That has a potential downside for teachers who by and large, I think sometimes wish the parents would stay out. But I think it's forever changed the equation. Parents want to know what's happening. They've been watching very carefully. That will change. Of course, some of it will revert back, but I don't think you're ever going to see passivity in parents again.
Yeah. Zoe, are you there, or do you want me to read the question?
I'm here and I'm unmuted.
Love it.
Hello, everybody.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. I have a million questions because what you're talking about is really aligned with my research
I'm
interest.
happy. Oh, look, I know we have to end. I never like to end with questions. Happy to set something else up and just talk till there are no
Awesome.
questions.
Let's do it.
Okay.
But the question that, in this communal space, I'm wondering if you've been looking at groups of people experiencing what I'm going to call like pivotal life moments. So think about high school seniors, maybe kids who are starting school. I'm even thinking about people who have lost a loved one. So if you've been able to hone in on what it's like to experience like a real pivotal moment that is never going to be replicated in isolation. And then I'll just add one more follow-up to that. I am particularly concerned about students who would be the first in their families to go to college, who are seniors right now, who, we've seen FAFSA completion rates are really low. We're very concerned about first generation students transitioning or not transitioning to college. And we saw a drop last year. So that's, I'm wondering like that whole cohort of students from last year and this year, how we best support those students.
Well, to the pivotal moments question, I write a column every week, and I've written an awful lot that came out of our COVID work. And I wrote one on pivotal moments in learning, the tragedy of those who went through COVID last year as their last year of high school and what it meant missing proms, grad nights, graduation, and then even worse, their first years of college in their parents' basement. Alan told me, I didn't realize till recently that Alan's son is second year of Harvard Law School, and we won't, you go to Harvard, you work your whole life to get into Harvard Law School, to be hanging out, having pizza at night, meeting the notion of going to is just a tragedy, although he'll be there next year, I'm sure. So we do think there have been pivotal moments that will never be restored. Therapists and others, we talk to them, say that some of these scars may never, particularly of really young children, may never recover. So we are we pay a lot of attention to whether this impacts the transition from high school for first people. That I don't know yet, and would welcome your thoughts and your help on how to get at that, because we're in the field continuously for 5 years. We pull the data every quarter, but every quarter we get to add a few things. And then we think within a year or so, we're going to cut a lot of the COVID questions, we hope, and we'll have opportunity to ask even more. So I'd love to know how you think we could get at that.
Let's do this. We've got a few more minutes and want to be respectful of everyone's time. And I know I always want to turn it back to the dean. Just a couple more questions, then we'll have the dean ask the last question, then we'll wrap it up.
Okay, why don't, before we lose anybody, why don't I just, my email, if anybody wants to reach out or would like to, help us or be involved, or just is Cole, just C-O-L-E. Oh, let me use my USC. So, Cole J at usc.edu. And our website is Digital Center, one word, digitalcenter.org.
Thank you, Jeff. And along those lines, to everybody listening today, and we'll make this available to others that aren't live, that Jeff is for the next 5 years. This is going to be like pivotal research every quarter for the next 5 years. And Jeff has asked Rossier to be a research partner on that. And so getting your input.
And we will make all of the data completely available.
Don't you love that? Transparency. Jeff has learned from politics, transparency. So for all of us, again, it doesn't have to be right now in this moment, but share with Jeff, share with me, share with the dean, ways in which you think Rossier could be helpful. We want this to be as robust and as deep as possible. And as Jeff knows, we have an unusual school that has great research, great teaching, and great practice. And those three combined can really, I think, help inform Jeff's research as we go forward. Jeff, one methodological or a series of questions I see from Christopher and Catherine and others. Talk to us about those that are in the most underserved communities. Talk to us about people, when we look at data, polling data off the last election cycle, which people weren't always free in terms of or feeling free or feeling vulnerable to share real reactions. How are you factoring that in to get to the root cause or the root issues of what you're asking about?
All right, well, first of all, this work by necessity has to be online. I can talk about how, and therefore we are very conscious of those who are not online. It's a small percentage, but it's about 5%, but it's an important percentage. So we're making plans to reach them by phone or if necessary in person. And that of course means ultimately there's more than just comparing online learning with in-person learning. We're talking to some school systems that can't do online and that are actually dropping homework off at students' homes. In some communities, they've made deals with the local public television station to do the education over television. So first, we're trying to make sure we reach of those who are not online. Of those who are online, we have a pretty carefully chosen panel. As I said, 6 sectors completely reflect the population. The 7th, learning, is specific to those 3 constituencies I've mentioned. And we make sure that it is meeting census data by, well, gender's easy, but by ethnicity, by age, by income, and by education, although age and income are almost always correlated. So it is, I mean, we're doing as much as sampling theory lets us to make sure, but we also welcome you looking over our shoulders after we get the first data to see if we've missed something. That's the beauty of 5 years. We can, we're going to find questions that don't work. We're going to find things that ways we did it that should be better or thrown out. But we're doing a good faith, it's not inexpensive, but a good faith effort to reach across the whole population.
Thank you. And again, for those that we've got a series of questions that are popping up here, send them, we'll forward, we'll follow up with Jeff. You can follow up directly. Share with us any follow-up questions. I'm looking at Helena and others have shared some really valuable resources.
And Alan, if you want, I mean, if people want, we could just do another Q&A sometime where I don't talk at all and just answer questions. If the interest is there, I'll let you gauge that.
Well, and again, I think as we go forward on these quarterly reports, partnering with Rossier, I know the dean and others here, this is such a valuable resource and toolbox for us to share. So, and by the way, for those on Jeff's sideswipe on me with my son, I pay for his pizza. So, that's
not the same, Alan.
But it is good to have my oldest at home, even though Harvard Law School Zoom 101, it ain't Professor Kingsley and it ain't the paper chase, let me tell you. So I want to turn it back to the dean, and I'll just say a last 30 seconds after the dean asks his question. But Dean?
Well, I feel bad because I already got a couple of questions in. So let me give someone else get the last question. I just want to thank you, Jeff. This was really fascinating, learned a lot, clearly could go on a lot longer. And we'd love to work with you to continue to mine this data and learn more about the impacts that we imagine will continue for many years to come.
We welcome that, and we will pull our data, the first quarter's data, we will pull at the end of the month. It'll take us about 10 days to process it, and then we want to know, what we want you to react to what we're finding and what you think's significant. And so it's about 6 weeks from when we really would like to engage.
Yeah, I think, and thank you, Dean. And I think Jeff, again, I'm looking at the questions. So many are dealing with equity issues. And we know, you mentioned, some stats on the broadband. We know from the work of Stephen Aguilar and Hernan Galperin from Annenberg, and that in the most underserved communities, we're not talking 8 to 10%, we're talking 25, 30%, do not have adequate communications. And as we all know, for education, Wi-Fi hotspots, these are Band-Aids. It is a broadband piece. So I think as we work with you going forward, so important to be able to go at these underlying huge issues in terms of equity, digital divide, and then helping guide us as researchers, as teachers, and as practitioners about the road from here. So last words to you, Jeff. And again, I can't tell you, I've known Jeff and his work for more than a quarter of a century. And it's so, I gotta tell you, there aren't a lot of things that are enjoyable during this pandemic. Being able to work with friends, scholarly, thoughtful, brilliant folks like Jeff Cole make me very happy. And again, I think it can help inform all of our works, both personally and professionally. So Jeff,
Thank you, Alan.
closing thoughts?
Once again, we think these issues are compelling. I really do believe, it's not a mantra or hype, I really do believe that we have this once in a lifetime opportunity to rethink everything in our lives. And my job, my whole career has been to create great data and make sure it gets in the hands of policymakers, companies, parents, teachers, and that's what we're doing here. And we very much need your help on the learning sector, but we welcome, I'm sure many of you are as interested in entertainment or communities or work. If you can, the presentation we'll make available. I'll make sure you have a copy. And my email you have, or I assume you can distribute it. And I welcome the opportunity to answer more questions and to have a number of you, I hope, step forward and say, we'd like to contribute.
Well, thanks everybody. Thanks to the Dean. Thanks for Kane, for Australia, for Beatrice, for all those that helped make today possible. We're very appreciative, Jeff, and may the conversation continue. We really appreciate, and everybody stay healthy.
Thank you to the Dean. Thank you, Alan, and thank you to the faculty and staff. It's been great.
Thank you.